Welcome everyone. So this semester, this is our third lecture series here at the Levy Center, Adult Learning Center, and we're attempting to bring the lecture series back. So we brought some of our hardest hitters here, including last week you had Dr. Hodder. The week before that you had Monica Turner, and this week we had former ambassador of Zimbabwe, I apologize, Ambassador Rhodes. So a little bit about Ambassador Rhodes. Please let me say first, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nicole Picata. I'm the new OLLI assistant with Marlo. You might have worked with Janice in the past, so I, along with him, assist Marlo wherever we can. I'm also a graduate student in the NCRP program, Negotiation, Conflict Resolution, Peace Building, which is where my mentor, Ambassador Stephen Rhodes, he also lectures. So, a little bit about Ambassador. Currently, the Ambassador is a lecturer in the Negotiation, Conflict Resolution, both the undergraduate and the master's program at Cal State Dominguez. But prior to that, he brings with us his development and financial management expertise, and he's established his new lines with Zimbabwe. As I told you, he was a former ambassador with Zimbabwe. Prior to that, he was with Ronald Reagan in the administration, and he served communicating and establishing relationships with mayors in the United States, with city officials and mayors, and making sure that they were on the same program as Ronald Reagan, and trying to make sure that President Reagan's initiatives went through. Recently, Ambassador Rhodes, as I said, is an adjunct professor in negotiation, conflict resolution, and peace building at Cal State University Dominguez Hills, where he teaches the international component. Additionally, at the Ambassador, he was you were in the All-Star, were you not? For Loyola.
No, I was Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame. So look, thank you. Come on up. So look, to make this simple, we have a small crowd today. So as you see, I'm sweating up here, so let me not get nervous anymore. Let's give Ambassador a round of applause and welcome. Thank
It's good to get applause before I even begin. My mother, okay, well today what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you a bit of a film about Mr. Bush, who I met back when I was actually I was 29 years old when I went to the White House. My job was special assistant to the president, and Nicole has asked me to bring the commission that I was given by the president as a commissioned officer. You're free to take a look at these. I got to know Mr. Bush closely in April of 1981, right after President Reagan was shot. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Do we have sound yet, Mr. Washington? No. Well, Mr. Washington is the reason that I'm here. Between these two people, I take my marching orders. So this is interesting times. One of the things that George Bush was good at was bringing people together. As a Republican from Texas in the 60s, you could have held a Republican convention back in those days at a phone booth. They don't have phone booths anymore. And I belong to an even smaller group, Black Catholic Republicans from New Orleans. So back in January of 1981, we had the inaugural for Mr. Reagan. I'm not going to bore you with all the things that went on prior to that, but this is a story to show you how naive I was at 29. That December, NBC did a they did a mini series called Backstairs at the White House, and it was about the Ushers, who are there through administration to administration. And I found it rather fascinating. So at the inaugural, earlier I told my boss, I was on the chairman's staff at Dart Industries, which was merged with Kraft. So in 1980, our company went from 600 million to $1.2 billion, and 2 billion, 2.1 exactly. So I thought this was a great opportunity for me to use my MBA to learn how to market cheese around the world. When I told the chairman that, he looked at me, and pardon me, ladies, he said, "That's the dumbest goddamn thing I've ever heard you say. If Ronnie Reagan wins, we need to get you back to Washington and find something for you in the Commerce Department, and you do that and then come back and run for Congress," which was not what I wanted to do. So I thought that now I've let the genie out of the bottle. So things went on, and he sent my resume to a guy named Penn James, who later became assistant to the president for personnel. So at the inaugural, I run into Mike Deaver. I don't know if you remember that name or not, but Mike was very close to me. When I worked at DART and ran our political action committee, Mike was the only, Deaver and Hanford was the name of their firm, and Mike was, they were the only consultants that I used. So I run into Mike at the California Ball, and he comes up to me and he says, "Steve-O, I hear your name getting bounced around for a position at the Commerce Department."
My website is fast.
It's not over yet. A little competition. So Mike says, "You don't really want to go to the Commerce Department, do you?" I said, "Absolutely not." So then as he walks away, he says, "Good, because we got a spot for you at the White House." Now, the idiot that I am, I'm thinking, why does Mike think I'd want to be an usher at the White House? I didn't realize the office of the president was a lot bigger than just the usher staff. I'm killing time here while we get this. So when I came back from Washington, I stopped off to see my mother.
Create your Wix site today.
And
Wix, nobody does it better.
Almost.
And Marvel Studios, Captain Marvel,
So-
theaters, March 8th.
I stopped off to see my mother to tell her that I met with Jim Baker, the president, and they'd offered me a job as special assistant for local government. My job was to work with mayors, county officials, city council members, towns and township people throughout the United States, as well as the District of Columbia, and be the liaison between local government and the president, which at the time was challenging because unlike previous administrations where the budget was increasing, we were talking about cutting the budget, and we were talking about eliminating a lot of the categorical grants, which were grants that went directly from the federal government to local government, and they'd gotten used to that. And they didn't have to worry about politics, jousting around with the state government. So I go in and tell my mom, I said, "Mom, look, it looks like I'm gonna be going back to Washington, and this is what they want me to do." And I'm the last of 5, by the way. 4 sisters, all older than me and much smarter. So Mom put her head down for a minute. She said, when you graduated from high school in New Orleans, you got a scholarship to Loyola, and we thought it was Loyola in New Orleans. And you went all the way to Los Angeles. And then you graduated, we thought you'd come back home. But instead you got a job working with one of those big old cooperations. That's the way you say corporations in New Orleans. So the next thing we hear, you're gonna marry Betty, a nice little girl from home. We know you're coming back, and you bring that poor child all the way out here. And now you tell me you're gonna go to work for Ronald Reagan. She put her head down and she looked up at me and she said, Steve, cher, meaning dear in French. You still Catholic? A lot of change. So, yeah, I'm still Catholic. And are we ready to go?
Yeah, I think so.
So what we're gonna do is watch about an hour of this, and it gives you a history of George Bush. And I'm gonna stop it right after the convention, and maybe a couple minutes into, and literally only a couple minutes into what happens after Mr. Reagan takes office. During the convention, Ford makes it known that he would be willing to accept a slot as vice president, but he would want to change the responsibilities. And President Reagan looked at him and said, "Yeah." He didn't say yeah, but he said no. The Reagan's kitchen cabinet at this point, this was the Wilson, Dart, Holmes Tuttle, and guys like that, they were the inspiration behind Bush getting on the ticket. And they made the president realize that what Bush brought to the ticket gave it a stronger appeal in the country, because Reagan was the conservative. Bush had a broader appeal, given his view on civil rights, his international experience, those things that Reagan didn't have. So, let me pick up from here. By the way, does anybody need to take a break? Okay.
Can I get your PowerPoint?
Yes, we do.
For 5 minutes or 2?
Actually, we're gonna, I don't want to worry about it with that part. I'll just stop. But, and I guarantee you when you come back, you wouldn't have missed anything else. So, Mr. Bush won, I believe, 7 primaries in the Republican primary. If you recall, John Anderson ran as an independent, and there was another guy whose name escaped, I didn't bring the paper with me, who was a libertarian who was on the ticket for the Republican primary. Actually, that's in the election. So you have Anderson running as an independent, this other guy, Jimmy Carter, and Ronald Reagan. Immediately after the election, Bush brought his, now I was in the Reagan camp, but I can remember talking to Pete Teeley, Chase Untermeyer, who you saw there, Shirley Green, and them all telling me that immediately after the election, Mr. Bush brought his staff together and said, "Listen, I don't ever want to hear you guys say anything about the president or the Reagan White House. We're a team." Mr. Bush really transformed the office of the vice president. Jimmy Carter started it by bringing Walter Mondale down from the Capitol. The role of the vice president was he had one function, one constitutional function, and that was to break tie votes. The rest of the time, he had a big office in the Capitol, and he kind of sat there, read the paper, played golf, whatever. Jimmy Carter brought Walter Mondale down and got him involved in policy. It's a tricky thing, because if you're a vice president, you really don't have a constitutional role in policy. You're there as an advisor to the president. So the thing that you have to be very careful about is you don't want to get between the president and one of the cabinet ministers or secretaries, cabinet secretaries. Because if you do, they'll cut you off and you'll be out of the circle. So what he and President Reagan did was they would have their little Thursday lunches where it would be an hour and a half, just the two of them, and they would talk about issues of importance. And it was all private. He wouldn't tell anybody what they talked about. None of that was ever reported. But it was tremendously helpful to President Reagan. And he alluded to that on a couple of occasions. But it wasn't the kind of thing that you would hear in the press. George Herbert Walker Bush was the best boss I've ever had. I told you a little bit about Justin Dart and how I got to the White House. Fabulous guy. He treated me like I was his son. He had a son named Steve, by the way, who didn't want to be involved in the business, and Mr. Dart brought me along. And I learned so much from this guy, the kind of stuff that you don't learn in business school. And a lot of it had to do with people, talking to people and listening. And that's one of the things I try to impart with my students. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. What you have to do is be the person who's listening more, because you never know what you're going to pick up from people. And I've adopted that throughout my career in business, in banking, in politics, and now teaching. One of the things that was particularly good about Mr. Bush was a sense of humor and a trust in the people around him. My relationship began with him after President Reagan was shot. Again, as I told you earlier, my job was to work with local government. And what I was doing was, I had an hour of the president's time every week. And what I would do with that is I'd bring in mayors or county officials, city council members to talk about block grants, because we were changing from categorical to block grants. Block grants was going to be different for local government, because now instead of getting their money directly from the federal government, it was going to go to the states. And the states then would set up their own set of regulations. But what the federal government did was say, look, you can spend this money in this broad area. You guys work out the particulars in terms of how you want to spend it. And that was very wise on the part of President Reagan, because he'd been a governor, and he realized that in the 50 states, they're different. And what works in Maine is probably not going to work in Albuquerque, and what works in Louisiana clearly is not going to work in the city of New York. So, the president shot. I'm thinking, now, I got to figure out a way to make these local elected officials feel that they have a voice at the White House. So, not knowing my limitations, being 29 years old, I called the vice president. I said, Mr. Bush, can I see you? And he said, yeah, Steve, come on up. So I went in and I said, look, Mr. Vice President, the president's been shot. Here's what I've been trying to do. I need you to preside over meetings that where I'll bring local elected officials in so that you can hear their concerns, and I'll make sure we have the right cabinet members there to answer their questions. But it's important for you to be there. And he looked at me and he gave me a George Bush smile and said, Stever, you got me. That's how I developed my relationship with Bush. From April through July, almost every week, we had county officials or municipal officials in to talk to him and voice their concerns to the appropriate cabinet members. And we ended up designing a block grant program that actually worked. Bush was probably the most competitive guy I've ever met. And I think I'm pretty competitive. He used to run 3.5 miles. He wouldn't go further than that. But at 63, it's pretty good. Now that I'm 67, I really know what 63 is like. So we would do these runs on Sunday mornings. The phone would ring. This is back before cellular phones. And I'd pick up the phone and I'd hear, Mr. Rhodes, White House switchboard. We have the Vice President of the United States for you. Stever, it's 7 o'clock. We need you here at 8. We're going for a run. And usually that would mean it'd be me, the Vice President, and 2 or 3 other people. Lee Atwater, who ultimately became his campaign manager when he ran for president, I introduced to this group. And after you do this run, this is a little interesting aside, Mr. Bush developed something called the Sauna Effect. You guys know what it's like to be in Washington in the summer. It's as muggy as New Orleans. So you go for a run. So you got, 4 to 5 guys who've been running, and we're talking the whole while. Usually talking politics or sports or whatever as we run. And at the end of this, the car is kind of following us. And I can remember one Sunday in particular, we were doing the towpath. We had different paths, but we're on the towpath that goes from the CNO. It's the CNO Canal. And this is back before the advent of trains and stuff. So we'd run on this towpath. At the end of this, in June, we're dripping wet. We pile into the back of the limousine, and he would turn the air conditioner off. And that was the sauna effect. So on one occasion, and this is, we had Lee, I remember we had Lee there, Vic Gold, who you saw, and I started saying, this is cruel and inhuman punishment, and I'm going to call Ben Hooks at the NAACP and let him know how you treat me. So I'm doing this the whole way back. We get to to his residence, which is the Naval Observatory. All the vice presidents stay at the Naval Observatory. And as we get there, they open, the Secret Service has to open the door because it's armored. So I fall out of the car and I'm going on talking about, I'm black, you don't treat black people like this. So I'm sitting on the porch and I can hear Mrs. Bush walking out. Now, here's the key. I'm wearing, whenever we would travel domestically, I would always select the restaurant. That's how I get to be this size. So I'm sitting on the porch, I hear Mrs. Bush come out, and I'm wearing a t-shirt that was given to us the previous week when we were down in Destin, Florida. Cajun food was just becoming popular. This is 1984. So I'm wearing this t-shirt, and it's soaking wet. And I'm holding court in front of the vice president of the free world, and these other guys. Mrs. Bush comes out and sees the shirt on me, and she hits me over the head and says, "Young man, take that shirt off. That's horrible." And I looked at her, and what you saw there is Mrs. Bush. She thought she was my mother, and you could tell me what to do, and I let her do it. So I took the shirt off, and the reason she wanted me to take it off was The logo from this restaurant was called Harbor Docks, specialized in seafood, Cajun seafood. And their logo was a crawfish. And it said, suck the head, eat the tail. One of the things that was particularly good about Mr. Bush was the fact that he trusted his staff. I was on the president's staff, and after the midterm elections, he wanted me to come in and be his chief domestic policy advisor. I wanted to leave government. And over the Christmas holidays, it dawned on me that I was really being an idiot because, you know, after President Reagan would run for re-election, Bush had to be one of the people, the top 5 people to consider for this slot. So I came back and I finally met with him. Now remember, from the time of the election in November until end of January, people were coming to see me and say, you know, you need to go see the vice president. Anyhow, I go meet with him and he said, you know, Stever, I've watched you for 2 years. I want you on the staff. And he said, I realize that you're not going to have the same kind of line management authority that you have on the president's staff, but you're going to have access to a lot more information, and information is power. You know, at 31 years old, you don't really appreciate that message about information. And you particularly don't appreciate the fact that knowing how to use it is even more important than the information. But that's what he told me. And for some reason, the Holy Spirit was on me, and I listened to him, and I took the job. So, how are we doing for time?
You're good.
Okay. I'm going to tell you a couple more stories here. Some are very self-effacing. It's a good thing my mother has gone on because she wouldn't want me to tell the story. Right after the president was shot, I was supposed to have a meeting with him that afternoon. And I got a call, and my assistant did, Steve, your mom's on the line. And she said, Steve, are you okay? I said, yeah. She said, you weren't with the president? I said, no. She said, God, for God's sake, don't stand next to the president. Now, you know, everybody else wants to be seen with the president. So, as time went on, every time she knew that I was going to be either with the president or the vice president, she said, Steve, for God's sake, don't stand next to them. So, Bush, Mr. Bush, and I gotta tell you, that you already heard me say that he's the best boss I ever had. That Bush family is something special. One of my sons got to know, I have 2 sons, but the younger boy would send him little notes. And this was not encouraged by me, he did it on his own. Bush would answer him. And when he graduated from high school, Mr. Bush sent him a nice note and a dictionary, and he signed the dictionary. Unfortunately, it was destroyed in Katrina, but that's the kind of guy he was. So, during the '84 campaign, he did a lot of campaigning for the president. We would be gone 3 to 4 days a week. My routine was, well, whenever the president, vice president traveled domestically, either I'd be on the plane with him or someone from my staff. And we had the briefing book so that when he would do a press conference, before that stop, we would brief him on the issues and so on. So, to make a very long story short, I'm not gonna bore you with why, but I was late for Monday morning Wheels Up. Wheels Up, 8 o'clock. That meant that at 8 o'clock, the plane was gonna start taxiing off the tarmac onto the runway. Well, I'm, let's see, 31, 32 years old. Had a little girlfriend at this point. And because we'd done some stuff on Saturday campaigning, my whole weekend was thrown off. So the alarm clock goes on, and I look at the clock and say, okay, 5 minutes. And then I woke up and it was 7:15. I hadn't packed. In pajamas and stuff. And I was living in Upper Northwest, right up 16th Street from the White House. But I had to get all the way out to Andrews Air Force Base. So I jumped out a bit, put on some trousers, and threw a suit and shirts and other stuff into, you remember the old Hartman bags? And I threw that in there with the idea being that once I got to Andrews, hopefully I wouldn't be as disheveled as I was. Now, here's the problem. I was driving a little Porsche that I had. And it's hard to change in a Porsche. So I'm thinking, okay, what to do? I'm looking at the clock. And, once the vice president gets on the plane, they close the door and they're ready to go. Roads are no roads. So I finally get to Andrews. It's 8 o'clock, 0800. And this is back before security and all that stuff. So there was a little airman. Andrews is run by the Air Force. So I see this guy and I throw in my keys and I look like a vagabond, really. And I'm disheveled and I'm running through Andrews Airport. And as I'm getting to the back of the airport, it looks like this, a lot of windows. I see the vertical stabilizer of Air Force Two moving. And I said, oh my God, I got the briefing book. So I run outside and there is the base commander and the wing commander saluting the plane as it moves out. So now, imagine what I look like, okay? So I go up to these guys and say, hey, you gotta stop this plane. And they look at me. I said, really, you gotta stop it? I said, well, who are you? Steve Rhodes. Well, Steve Rhodes, we can't stop it. So I said, okay, so when the vice president gets to Cleveland and goes before the press for the press conference, when he can't answer questions, you want me to tell him it's because, and I looked at it was a colonel, and I looked at his name tag. You want me to tell him that Colonel so-and-so wouldn't stop the plane? They get on the phone, on the radio, and all of a sudden you see Air Force Two. Normally we got on the back of the plane. They send one of the, you remember the old days where they have these little trucks that had the ladder that go up and you go on? So they sent one of those things over for me. At this point, I'm starting to get a little worried. And I noticed they didn't drop the ladder at the back. They opened up the front door. So here is Vagabond Rhodes. Still, I hadn't even zipped the thing. Clothes are coming out. So when I get up to the door, when you travel with these guys, a while, you get to know the crew and the plane. They know you. So I get in, and there's two guys sitting right by the door. They look at me and they look away. So I start to walk down, and as we walk down Air Force Two, there are two bedrooms. Turns out Mrs. Bush was on the plane. And as I'm walking down, she's at the door, and she looks at me startled. She closes her door. I thought that was odd. So now I'm walking down. So you got one bedroom here, another bedroom here, and this area here opens up, and it's a big office. And there, sitting at the desk, is the Vice President of the United States doing what he normally does, you know, because they don't tell him to buckle up. He's at his desk and he's eating his usual breakfast. Great nuts with yogurt, black coffee. So as I enter into the office part of the plane, he's sitting at the desk holding a cup and coffee all down his white shirt. And I started saying something, he said, no, just go. When I left the White House, they had we did a fundraiser. It was the Steve Rhodes Celebrity Roast. And Mr. Bush told that story. All right, like I said, in spite of that, this guy trusted me. So, Mr. Reagan, in 1983, wanted, at this point, we'd started something called the Star Wars defense. Really, it was fictitious. But the whole effort of this thing was to get the Soviets to spend money. We knew their economy was failing. And now the thought was, if we, begin to talk about this as a new defense initiative, now they're going to have to spend more money to try to offset it or defend against it with an already frail economy. So the president knew that he needed to have someone convince our allies in Europe. So he asked the vice president to do it. In the course of this, we hit 8 countries in 15 days. And it was funny because after about the 5th day, he didn't really know where you were. But on the trip, what was interesting was, on our way back, we stopped in Iceland. And my assignment in Iceland was to meet with the Minister of Defense. So this is Bush doing this, okay? He said, Stever, I want you to meet with the Minister of Defense. They had a problem. We had an air base there. And there was some rumblings about the government wanting to close our base. It was important in the Second World War because it was a refueling stop and a listening post. This is back in the days when there was just radio and you could send a signal from there just about anywhere. But it was also a refueling point. So, but we still had this big base with all these airmen, and they're talking about closing us. So I was sent to go meet with the Minister of Defense. Remember, I'm the domestic policy advisor. So apparently these guys hadn't done the background on me like they should have, because I had this luncheon meeting with the Minister of Defense, and when I walked into the room, his eyes got about this big, and it was for a reason. So our meeting was supposed to last 30 minutes. I think it went an hour and 45. So at the end, I'm looking at my watch because I have stuff to do. And this wasn't the only thing I had to do that day. I said, well, look, Mr. Minister, tell me about the base. What's the problem? How do we resolve this? And he said, oh, Mr. Rhodes, no problem. Don't worry. We'll take care of it. And all you heard was grumbling about closing the base. Here was what the problem was. A lot of the fathers, and I mean by the senior people in government, they wanted to close the base because the Icelandic women were becoming very much enamored with black airmen. So Bush sent me to talk to the Minister of Defense. It worked out. He knew what he was doing. Last thing, 2 more stories to tell you about George Bush. In 1984, during the campaign, the NAACP had their annual meeting in Washington. In New Orleans. And there was a lot of polarization within the Democratic community in the black community about President Reagan. So they invited President Reagan to be their speaker, and it was turned down, and they sent it over to Mr. Bush. And before he would accept any events, typically it would circulate through the staff, senior staff, and we'd make recommendations as to whether or not it should do it. So everybody on the staff thought this was a good idea for the vice president to do this. And I said, no, it's not a good idea. These guys don't want to hear anything you have to say. Now, if you want to talk to black people, why don't you let me set up something with some of the black business groups, the Black Chamber of Commerce, the black manufacturers, somebody who actually appreciate your what you have to say and what we're doing. And he looked at me and said, Steve, no, that's too easy. If I don't do this, who's going to do it? And he says, we have a good message, and I want to make sure that they hear from me. I said, well, my goal will be to get you in and out without getting booed. He got booed. It was a bad experience. But that's the kind of guy he is. He had strong convictions, and he thought it was the right thing to do. Last thing was also in 1984, we had a problem with the peso devaluation along the 36 border counties from Brownsville, Texas to San Diego. The president was going to be in Texas, and he was going to give a speech at a rally, and he wanted to be able to announce the fact that he put together a task force to do something about the peso. These counties, most of the revenue to the counties along the border at the time came from commerce, sales tax, stuff like that. So with the peso devaluation, commerce had almost stopped. So I get a call at 5:30 in the morning, and it's the Vice President of the United States said, Steve, where are you? And I looked at the clock and said, I'm in bed, where are you? He said, I'm at the White House and I'm waiting on you. I said, you're kidding. He said, well, they didn't tell you. I said, no. And then Mrs. Bush picks up and says, ha, we got you. So she used to also short sheet your bed sometimes when you're done. So to make a long story short, he wanted me to read the speech that the president was going to give the following night to see if this is something that we can do, and if so, how can we do it? I came out of the president's staff in intergovernmental affairs, so I knew someone at each department and agency throughout the federal government. And I said, this is no problem. What we'll do is we'll bring everybody together, and what we'll suggest to them is that they go back to their departments and look for grants that were in the pipeline in these 36 border counties, and what we'll do is we'll expedite it. We'll move it further up the pipeline so that we can expedite funds that are already working through the system and are in effect approved, but just waiting. And this way we can get more federal funds in there to help these counties. And we did that. But it was interesting to me the fact that Bush was the kind of guy who let you do what you were good at. And he used to refer to me as the problem solver, and would always tell me, industry pays well for people who can solve problems. Now, you heard in this video tell about the fact that he didn't want to go into the securities business. His brother, Jonathan Bush, had a roommate who later ended up at Smith Barney. When I started talking to the folks at Smith Barney, Mr. Bush got on the phone, called Alan Ryan and said, listen, I understand you guys are talking to Steve. Alan didn't even know that at the time. And he said, I want to make sure that you're not wasting his time. So he said, call me back and let me know. Alan Ryan went to the head of Smith Barney, a guy named John Orr, who looked like Daddy Warbucks, to find out what was going on. He didn't know anything about it. It turns out that a guy named Murray, can't remember, I should remember this, it was my boss, Morgan Murray. Morgan Murray was the guy I'd been talking to. And with that call from the vice president, sealed the deal. But what I want to tell you is, when I was thinking about the investment banking business, he called his brother Jonathan. And Jonathan spent half a day with me in New York talking about the investment banking business. Mrs. Bush's brother, Scott Pierce, was the CEO of E.F. Hutton. And he thought I was going to join them. So when I made my decision, I got calls from, he also, Nick Brady, who you saw in here, had been Senator Nick Brady, and then eventually became Secretary of the Treasury. He belonged to his firm. He was the managing partner of Dillon Reed. I spent some time with him. And these guys ended up calling me and said, hey, what happened? I thought you were going to join us. But Mr. Bush was that kind of guy. One of the things that I teach in my leadership class is to be a good leader, one of the qualities is you take care of your people. In the military, and particularly in the Marines, the way they show this is officers eat last. They make sure that the enlisted people are all taken care of first, and then after they're done, then they'll eat. The Bush family was like that. Like I said, he was the greatest boss I ever had. And what you see there was the notice that I got when he passed away about the funeral arrangements. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Were you in his cabinet or for Bush when he was president?
No, I was sent to Zimbabwe as our ambassador. And the reason for that was because I was the fourth ambassador. We didn't have a good relationship with the government. And they were rotating on to the National Security Council. And he said, look, Steve, we need to be able to work with these guys. I was having a great time with Smith Barney, selling bonds and underwriting securities. Quick story. So I've been avoiding Chase Undermeyer, who at the time was assistant to the president for personnel, for about a month. And I'm at the dealership, getting my car serviced, and I hear my name, Paige, pick up the phone. So I pick up the phone, and the receptionist says, Mr. Rhodes, there's some idiot on the line saying it's the White House. So I pick up the phone, and White House switchboard said, Mr. Rhodes, I'm the President of the United States. And he gets on the line and he says, Stever, you're going to Zimbabwe. I just got off the phone with your mom. I told her you're on your way, so get a hold of Chase. George Bush. In 6 months, we had a working relationship with the government. And the reason for that had nothing to do with policy as much as it did with human interaction. When I presented my credentials with Robert Gabriel Mugabe, to the chagrin of my deputy, the ambassador is the chief of mission. The number 2 guy is the deputy chief of mission. This guy gave me about 15 things, policy things that he wanted me to talk to Mugabe upon our first meeting. I thought it was inappropriate. So what I asked him was, I said, Mr. President, what 3 things can we do to help you? I saw this guy get red from his neck up. I just wanted to know what they're interested in. We were going to be giving them $12 million over the course of the year in aid. So let's see what they want. he told me 6 months later, Mr. Mugabe. Now, granted, Mugabe, he wasn't our kind of guy, but 6 months later, he told me I was the first ambassador from the North who referred to him as Mr. President. And I was the first ambassador from the North who asked him what he wanted, how we could help him. To me, that was common sense. But apparently, that's not what donor countries do. They go on and they tell developing nations what they need. Every time we gave out a grant, it was always televised, and I explained to the Zimbabwean people that at my first meeting with President Mugabe, I asked him what he wanted, and here's the United States making good on our promise to help. Questions? Okay. Well, folks, it's been a real slice of heaven. Do whatever Ms. Picard tells you to do. Although I taught her, I didn't think I was in charge, but she has your best interest. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.